so I'm trying to blend into the crowd, so I got the beer in my hand. Hopefully that's going to smooth out this conversation a little. So, kanpai, so, this usually when people talk about the diversity, I think it's a story of somebody who comes from a minority background going through the journey. This talk is a little different because I don't really consider myself to be a part of the minority, right? I'm from California where the immigrants are abundant. I'm in the tech scene, like in the kind of familiar space. So for a long while, I thought, when it comes to diversity, right? I thought I was a fan of the cause and the supporter of the movement and so on and so forth. And I even have a little story of my experiencing a little bit of what's on the minority side. So one of my hobbies is cross-stitching. It's a needlework. Now, how many of you actually know what that is? Oh, a surprising number. I thought like this. So anyhow, I mean, this is actually mostly like a grandma, old lady, white people thing, right? I don't really belong in this. In fact, what gets me excited is, so I wrote a program that translates the image into the design, and I tried to optimize the amount of thread I use. So it's like a mathematical property of how to do things, and people start like rolling their eyes as soon as I start talking about it. So at one point, I went to this like a little needle workshop outside the Bay Area, and then so I went there and I discovered the lady was running the shop, and there was a big table, and like lots of old ladies surrounding the table and working on the crafts, and they are like having conversations. So it's clearly a kind of like a community place where people who share the same hobby went to. So I thought, well, it'd be nice to kind of try to blend in, but it was pretty clear to me like the shop master has no idea what I'm there for. So like so she was very polite and nice, but she said, "Oh, in the back of the store you can see things." And I saw it, like, I didn't feel any encouragement to join the table or etc. Right? So after a while, I kind of browsed around and I sort of like I went out of the store and I never came back. So I know it's like a subtle things, but when you're first there for the first time and you see that the existing group of people are sort of socializing, it creates a high bar. Anyhow, so that's the, so I felt like, okay, so this must be how it's like to be in the, let's say, women in the tech scene or whatever, African American in the tech scene or however, right? It's not like people are actively being hostile to you. But anyway, so the other sort of my credibility to being a fan of the cause is like, I built this extensible open source project known as Jenkins. Now, what it does isn't really important in this context, but the idea is like, I built a sort of like a platform where people can build interesting plugins on top of it and then make this platform useful for whatever they are doing. And that was something very important for me because I really believe that the innovations happen everywhere. In that way, people who work in any industry, working from mainframe to Fortran to like a C# to whatever, can add their stuff on top of it. And different parts of the world develop software differently, so are different industries and so on. So to me, like, this is my testament to that. This is how I internalized the diversity back then. And I thought, well, this is something I kind of aligned with what I've been doing. And again, that's why I felt I was a part of the cause and supported the movement. Now, so, my day job is at CloudBees, and one of my responsibilities back then as CTO was to run the community team. And at one point, I hired Tracy Miranda. She's some of you might actually know her. And then to be a part of this community team. And I guess one of her credibility is that she drove the diversity initiative in Eclipse Foundation. So that wasn't the reason I hired her, but I knew that was her background. So in some sense, it was no surprise that in one of these face-to-face community team planning meeting where we are talking about like annual plan or like what the community team should be prioritizing for. And then she brought up, again, unsurprisingly, that the diversity initiative should be something we should really like put at the top of the priority. So I forgot some of the details, but it's like, outreachy or some sort of like explicit reach out to women in tech kind of program. And then to my surprise, I sort of find myself like unconvinced, right? And that was sort of like a shock to me because again, back until that point, I thought, I'm a fan of the cause and supporter of the movement. Now, to be fair, I felt like the pitch was a little weak. Right? It was like, there's this feeling of like trying to ask engineers to justify why refactoring is a good thing. Like, the person believes in it so much, Like they are simply unable to explain it in ways that kind of connect the dots for people who don't share the same belief at the same strengths. But nonetheless, so the questions like what I discovered, and the reason I couldn't I couldn't get myself convinced that the pitch was, the question wasn't so much whether that's a good thing or not, right? Clearly that is a good thing. But the question is it better than all the other things that, let's say, the community team could have been doing by any given time, right? Because I had lots of other things. I had my own ideas of what we wanted to do, like a better documentations, like interview sessions to the new plugin developers, like a website redesign, like a social media exposure. All sorts of things could be done. So really the question is, like, how is it better than all the other things that we should be doing? In other words, it's a question of the business value, the priority. And then that's when I realized, like, okay, so I guess I thought I was a fan, but actually I was a part of the inertia. I was a part of the system. I was a part of the indifference that sort of could prevent people who are trying to push the needle to struggle against, right? So that was a sort of shocking liberation for me. It wasn't like I didn't, again, back then, until then I thought I was with the movement. So that sent me down a little bit the path for soul searching. The way I saw it, I need to either come out in two ways. One, I internalize the value of diversity in ways that could justify in the business context. That is, I need to be able to articulate that it's better than some of the other things I was originally hoping to do. And then in that process, I'd be able to convince my boss and other team members that that is a worthwhile thing to do. Or, because to be fair, like, just because it's a social good value, diversity, like, doesn't mean it should be getting a free pass, so to speak. Like, it still needs to be justified in the same way every other good thing in the business needs to be justified. Or either that, or I have to admit that I don't really believe in it. Like, I'm not believing it enough to put this high up enough in the priority that I'm a part of inertia. And then that might be like a hard thing to buy, but at least I'll be honest to myself, right? So that was like a question that I had in the back of my mind as I was sort of like trying to collect information, run into stories. And I ran into one of the stories that I ran into in this space that really helped me kind of think about this is a story of Alan Hamilton. So she is a woman trying to start a new venture capital firm. And then so every VC firm, they said, at least the story goes, needs to have some investment thesis, like something that makes them unique, something that they believe in, that like makes themselves really unique, and that drives which firms they fund, and so on. So the hypothesis of this investment firm is one like, so she believes that this is not something she believes. The fact on the ground is that if you look at all the startup companies that are invested in their founders, by far they are like lopsided to white, male, well-educated people, right? And that's not an opinion; it's just a simple fact. And then she also claims, which quite believably, that the talent and the grit and whatever you call to make the founders successful for startup is evenly distributed across all these factors. So therefore, it stands to reason that there are certain segments of the founders, the potential founders, that are currently underserved, meaning, let's say women, the African American, and so on and so forth. So she thought, well, if her VC firm invests in those, the blue ocean founders that are currently not many other VCs are competing for, then she can get the quality candidates a lot more easily. So that's a business opportunity for her, not just a social cause. So I thought, oh, that was a great story. This is somebody who not only thought this is a worthy cause, but she saw a business opportunity in it. That's obviously like she justified that in ways that doesn't really take any believers to follow. And then this story is also parallel to her own struggle. So as you can see in her picture, she's not an insider. If the tech space has a diversity problem, you can believe that, you can imagine that the diversity problem in the VC space, meaning which is even worse. So she's a black, she's a lesbian, she's a woman, so she checks all the three diversities in one single person. So no wonder she kind of got this cause. And then the story, I'm really not doing the justice to this story, but at one point this involved her living in the San Francisco airport trying to meet people with money to help her get going with this 10 million fund or whatever. And then so she brought so this idea of let's go serve the underserved, and then it's this market-driven approach to the fairness that she's trying to bring. I thought that was kind of really cool, and then this the way she framed it is really well said. So she said, no, these founders are not underrepresented; they're just underestimated. And then so again, that sort of speaks to how she sees it, and then why this is not just a social cause but a business opportunity. So that sort of made a lot of sense to me, because if I thought about the developers that we attract in the open source project, it's clearly lopsided to a certain segment. And do I think that a skill set that's necessary for that is unevenly distributed to say those segments? I don't think so. Right? Now another story, and this one also came from the podcast. So nowadays, that's basically where I get any useful information for. Is this thing called carp cutting effect. So carp cutting is just very simply, it's a slope that goes down from the ramp to a street, right? So this apparently started in a 1960s or 70s in Berkeley, where this very eccentric figure in the wheelchair, and his story is also fascinating, but it's kind of outside, this little tangential to what I'm trying to talk about. So I do encourage you to go look that up. But anyhow, so the people in the wheelchair very naturally have a problem with the carp has the step. So they vocally complained to the city government, and then convinced the city government to do the carp cutting. And then what was discovered after the fact that yes, while they are the people in the wheelchair are the one that was getting the most harm out of this, before the carp cut, so they are the most vocal one that they complained. But when that problem was solved, the benefit wasn't local to the people in the wheelchair, right? People with baby strollers, the suitcase, delivery guy with the cart, all sorts of people had the secondary benefit. So this benefit has a long tail of the other sort of people. And so that's what's known as the carp cutting effect. You work on a problem that's sort of advocated by most vocal people, but that shouldn't be your mental picture of only people benefiting it. And here we have the transcript the whole time going, and it's got the same thing going, right? So I'm sure some of you have trouble hearing my accent, so you can see what I'm saying in here. Hopefully, what she as long as she could follow what I'm saying. Or when I'm not a native speaker of English, so when I watch movies on the airplane, or in a noisy environment, sometimes it's really hard for me to understand what they're saying in the movie. So I turn on closed captioning. So that's an example of I'm not deaf, but the closed captioning was originally done for deaf people, but nonetheless the benefit kind of goes beyond that. So that's sort of a lesson you can generalize. For example, when we say women in tech, we are not really just, it is talking about women in tech, but it's not really just about women in tech. We are talking about diversity, allowing other sort of minority people feeling like minority to come in. So those two stories sort of gave me a different perspective to think about this problem. So the way I internalize this is in the theme of the conference with beer. I'm trying to think okay, so this is really opening a new bar, starting a new company, starting a new open source project. It's you open the bar and then you sort of arrange it in the way that you think could serve people. And if you're lucky, the people would start rolling in, and then you observe how they behave, and then some of them it's going to inevitably give you feedback. And then you use that process, you learn from what they're saying and what they're doing to try to serve these audience better, right? So, maybe I'll stock up more Japanese beer in my bar because that's my passion, and then more Japanese guests would show up, and it kind of might become a social place for, the ex-Japanese expats to hang around or something like that. And then that's great, and then it's, you can grow like that for a good long while, and then you feel good about making progress and everything. But at some point, this kind of growth will plateau inevitably because you're kind of self-selecting your audience, right? So at some point, in order to ignite the next level of growth, you need to do something a little different. So what is that? And it is basically, I think the way to think about it is you need to sort of you need to reach out. You need to walk out to the street and see people who are currently not coming to your bar, right? Because there are other segments of the market that you're not currently catering to. So, for example, maybe you walk outside the bar and then you see that there are lots of Hispanic people walking around because that's a kind of neighborhood. And it actually give you some ideas that, oh, maybe we need to, like, what does it take to bring those people into the bar, right? So maybe I'll try to start stocking up Mexican beer or something like that. Or then maybe put the picture in the menu so that the different people could see what's going on, because those Japanese names, like you can never tell, like Kohsuke, like nobody can pronounce those names. So you know what it's like. So, and then you repeat the cycle basically to win more and more customers. Like the whole idea is like reaching out and then try to understand them and then try to bring them into your space. So if you think about it this way, it's kind of, I thought that was a lot more obvious than trying to think this in terms of more difficult political, like a loaded concept, like say gender or race or so on, especially for outsider like me. What I'm saying is that you don't want to just sit and wait for people to show up. You need to actively go reach out to people, especially if you're trying to talk about different kind of people. Now, in some other job professions like marketing, this is basically what they do all the time, all in out, right? The entire profession of marketing is around trying to put yourself into the shoes of the people you're trying to sell the product to. But somehow in this open source project, we get lucky because we often write the software that we want to use, right? So most people assume like, oh, I just need to produce a software for myself, or I just need to build a community for myself, people like myself. And then too many people, I think, still stay in that mode of, let's just open the bar and then hope that the people would show up and then let's grow from their mindset. And not realizing the lost business opportunities of all the other people walking around the street that you could bring in. The reason people don't do that is also because it is hard. Like it's hard to think about people who are not like you. It takes a training. Like that's why good marketing people is a skill of its own, right? But nonetheless, like any other skills, that's something you can work on and get better at. So that's so when I thought of that like that way, so that when it comes to the difficulty of imagining a segment that you don't see. So I realized that I actually had a lot more personal experience than I thought before. Let's say, like in the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that I don't feel like a minority because I'm Asian, well represented in the tech scene. Now, but what you actually, that is actually a part of the point. Like you might think Asians are well represented here, but it's actually not true because the only people you're seeing is Asian people who live here in the Western community. Like most of you have no idea the vast group of the developers, let's say, that's living in Japan, speaking their own language. Like how many of you, all right, Ruby doesn't count. How many of you know the open source project that came from Japan, right? Right? See, exactly. So I mean, there are actually tons of projects, but because of the language problem, or because of the time zone problem, these people simply are not connected with the group of people like here. So you don't see them. But I grew up there. I've spent 2 decades there. So I am well connected to these people. And I know that these people are just as capable. But because it's almost like we're living in a parallel universe. And that's a great example of how difficult it is for people to imagine these people actually exist. So we keep meeting in a kind of time zone that's in the midnight or 2 a.m. in the Asia. And then so you don't see them, right? So it's a self-reinforcing cycle, just like, let's say women in tech is a self-reinforcing cycle. And so that's like my personal example of the community that I know existed that we are not currently reaching out. And then I also have the other example where, like a few years ago, I had my first opportunity to visit China. And I was kind of blown away by the sort of level and the scale and the sophistication of the software development that's going on in there. Because again, like how many of you know open source project that came from China, right? Like they're very little. But they have. I mean, if you think about it, they're the second biggest economy in the world, and the more STEM people, like every stone you can throw, like it's going to hit some STEM people. So there's a lots of interesting projects that are happening in there. But again, for the same reasons, we don't see them. And then, in fact, so in the Jenkins project where I was involved in, we don't really have the people contributing to the project from the mainland China. Again, we have a lot of Chinese ethnicity people living in the Bay Area. There are plenty, but we are not connected. We are not connected with the mainland people. And I went there. Like I was wondering why, and I went there. It was quite obvious. Like if you think about it, so like in the mailing list, right? So that's a lifeblood of the open source projects where people converse. our mailing lists were on the Google groups. In China, there's this thing called Great Firewall, and you know what they blocked? It's Google. So like the entire mailing list was blocked from these people. And so I was like, why weren't you complaining? Like, we have a Twitter account. Oh, wait, that's also getting blocked. So they're basically like completely disconnected from every channel that we had. And if you go there, it's again the downright obvious, because as soon as I try to show those things to people, like it doesn't get me anywhere, right? So, but it took the actual act of me being physically there and meeting the people and getting the feel that, oh, there's something something real going on here. What are these sort of like tactical problems that's like blocking them? And in that sense, it's sort of like suddenly became a lot more tractable problem, right? It's not just it's not this like a vague concept of, oh, I need to reach out to people. No, it's just like we need a freaking mailing list all on Google, and we need to have like a presence in their social network account, not just Twitter. Those are things that any geek or any event or any marketing people could work out. And then started, so with those few concrete examples, I started seeing some of the things that we actually worked on was also a diversity problem. We just didn't know how to frame it in that way. The earlier on, this Jenkins project, right, it started as open source project, and then later we built a company called Cloudbees, and as the company got bigger, like we started bringing in people like, say, marketing people. And marketing is an important part of open source projects. I think one of the very first speaker talked about it, and I can't agree more with him. So initially, we tried to insert them into this open source community of the developers, and that turned out to be pretty difficult, kind of understandably, right? It's because these the projects with just the developers. Well, we built this sort of like a system that's only really catering for developers. So let's say this idea of meritocracy, that if you've been contributing to the project long enough, then you get to have more say. Well, that pretty much disabled, discourage everyone else outside writing code to come into the project, because that's the only a definition of the meritocracy that people normally think about, right? And then also the marketing people really didn't understand how this bunch of geeks would behave and how to converse and how to collaborate with them. So earlier my thinking was, okay, we need to educate the marketing people, arm them of give them the knowledge of what are these open source developers look like. It might look like this, and then so that was, but that was sort of, the education is obviously part of it, but that was also later I feel like it was lopsided. What was happening was, these people were a first set of guinea pigs that trying to sort of add another diversity axis, in this case job function, not gender, job function, into the project, right? So just like a carb cutting effect, I should have used them to drive to tear down some of the ramps that we built around the community, because that is not only going to help the marketing people, but the other job functions. And in fact, we actually did that. So we built the additional governance structure. We created the notion of teams, and give some of the leaders more authorities and titles so that they can act with more authority with the interface with other people and so on. And then so later, when we had to add the product managers or designers or the infrastructure operations people, they had a lot more easier time joining into the project, because we knew how to onboard different job functions. So that was a great example of actually carb cutting effect that's happening right in front of the eyes, but I just didn't see it that way. And I didn't sort of give the due credit to the first wave of this trailblazer, that is those couple of marketing team people who had to struggle every step of the way to get there. In some sense, I think everyone else that followed owe them the big thank you. So that's sort of where I sort of stand in 2019. I started to feel like diversity isn't just the gender or race or some of these well-understood concepts, although those things might help you think in terms of the concrete. It's anything, different geography, different job functions, all of that is worthwhile. Or more generally speaking, I think what diversity represents now is this a never-ending motion to reach out to people that you currently you're trying to serve better, never-ending motion to expand your market. And that's very much fundamentally what the business does anyhow. And in the process of trying to reach out and fixing obstacles, you solve more generic problem, and that's something tech people are good at. Like when we fix bug, like we don't just fix that one bug, we solve a class of problem that's represented in the same incident. So that sort of like helped me feel a little better after that, like a soul-searching moment where the Tracy Miranda brought up this important question. So on that note, I wanted to thank you very much. And,